Carroll, and I'd also like to thank Prinoy and the whole HTF team for having me. It's an honor. Great that it's a small audience. I actually know a few of you, so you know it's late in the day. One might say it's a dry topic, so please interrupt with questions as they come up. I've actually given this presentation at UCSF recently, and it was actually really well received, or maybe everyone lied to me afterwards. But so hopefully it's interesting. You'll take something away, and definitely it would be great. Just I don't need to hear my own voice drawn on the whole time. You know, very briefly on the firm, I think we're known in the Valley, grew up in the Valley with companies like Apple and Google, but it's what I do is healthcare, a lot of medical device, biotech, and healthcare IT, and the firm is very entrenched in those areas. I think, again, everyone in this room appreciates it, but you know, others don't. If you're just watching Silicon Valley and HBO, you don't know that healthcare is such an important part of the ecosystem here, and we're very proud to be the integral part of it. Kind of services we do for life science companies, everything from patents and regulatory advice, licensing, longer list would like to be full service to help everything you need. And then the other important differentiator that we're very proud of is that I work with doctors that have an idea that are have no company yet, maybe a provisional patent filed, all the way up to public companies, and we really like to scale from the very beginning on. So kind of high-level trends in early stage financings. I mean, the one thing I would say is, the only constant in the Valley is change, and I think we've been doing things for at the 50-year anniversary recently for a long time, but things have changed, especially recently. My experience is it gets adopted on the tech side first, and then healthcare IT quickly follows, and then the rest of life science after that. But things definitely are changing. Very big later stage rounds is kind of a flight to quality that we're seeing. International deals were the East Bay for me. I started the firm 15 years ago, but now there's some sort of international component in almost every deal. It's not just going up and down St. Hill Road. People are doing that are not finding venues to raise money. I think not to sugarcoat anything, it's been very tough for first-time entrepreneurs. If I've got a serial entrepreneur founder that you would know the name of. He just started a new company, and he can make a few calls, and he's raised $1 million, no problem. But someone who's doing it for the first time, I think track record is very important, and it makes it easy for investors. So you got to be creative, and I'm going to get a little bit of that. Obviously, I don't have all the answers, but again, questions are welcome. But this is kind of the new startup financing ecosystem we're seeing. Kind of at the top, people are going into incubators, and you hear about all these incubators in San Francisco, and you think of it on the tech side. But I have a client, a kind of home-based ultrasound company, actual real medical device, not just healthcare IT, that's in Y Combinator that just graduated from that class. And people in Y Combinator have revenue or employees. It's not just for a high school or college kid with an idea anymore. They actually are very selective, and it's kind of it's not a rite of passage, but you're branded. If you're a Y Combinator company, again, as an example, there are others that we work with, and lots of them. But if you can get in a brand name incubator, that really helps with the dialogue with investors. It gives you some additional credibility. Maybe not as powerful as you've sold a company for $100 million already, but it's definitely a start. So the ecosystem goes from there. Very small kind of angel funds that have grown up recently. Mission Bay Capital and the guys up at UCSF are doing a great job. They'll cut very early checks and down through the list there. So, I think an entrepreneur needs to have a game plan when, obviously, state the obvious, when they're going out to raise capital, and where you are in that pyramid of investors is going to determine how much you're going to raise, stage of company, and and the goals of the company. And so getting in kind of the nuts and bolts of the presentation, we only have a short time here today, so I'm going to try and go really fast and concentrate on what I hope people want to hear. But this is kind of the laundry list of different types of deals one might see, or calling these deals. Some of these aren't deals. The bootstrapping, I think, is obviously the first thing that every founder has to do in some way or another. You get up and quit your job. You're going to be funding your startup on credit cards and doing whatever it takes to get it going. Business plan competitions, at least for people coming out of college. And those I've seen companies go a really long way. I have a client, really cool healthcare IT company that had their software developed as a course at a university. The computer science class for the year actually coded their product for them. So I think there may be issues around ownership and other things, but basically you just need to be creative. And just the one point, practice point, as a lawyer, is if you are doing these types of things and cutting your own checks and using your own credit card, you should be careful about it and keep meticulous records, because you can actually get credit for that when a professional investor comes in the later stage financings. So it's not just a founder penalty. I think the vast majority of times, if you're smart about it, you can actually get, probably not repaid, that's pretty difficult, but at least converted into the same equity or debt financing that the first professional investor is doing. Founder preferred is actually a pretty rare animal, and I'll maybe just skip that one to keep things going. So you bootstrapped it, and then friends and family round is kind of the first place a lot of founders will go to raise capital. So a really smart founder will utilize this to almost create a round. So I see people trying to get friends and family rounds closed. There's a spectrum of that, right? Some friends and family rounds, it's really your father or brother or real family. Others are more arm's length acquaintances, people you meet at conferences. But a good trick I've found in these types of deals and stages of a company is to say, oh, I'm already closed on $50,000. Maybe it's, again, not every founder has $50,000 sitting in the bank, but instead of going around and bootstrapping your company on your credit cards, if you put in $50,000, $25,000 yourself, you can start telling people you've already closed a round. I'm not saying be disingenuous or lie, but you can build momentum and get a few more people in, and then you actually have a real round out of this. So the details of what it looks like on a more nuts and bolts level are on the slide there. And definitely there's dangers and pitfalls when you're getting money from friends. Not every startup makes it, and we sometimes do run into occasions where people weren't really cognizant of the fact that they could lose their entire investment. So I think disclosure and being very very forthright with people of how risky this is. I mean, the entrepreneur's conundrum is you're always the most positive person around. I mean, it's amazing how someone can jump off and do this. So you have to be, Pollyannish about it, but you still, disclosure, I think, is the key takeaway here when you're taking money from people you know. Another interesting way, and I think it works in healthcare IT especially, is funds from a potential early adopter, or lead customer, or other partners, and these can be non-dilutive. You need to build your product to a certain extent normally. You're obviously got a PowerPoint presentation. Stanford hospitals or UCSF isn't going to be cutting you a big check, but I've seen people start to partner with institutions relatively early in the life cycle, even before they have products, and you can get some amount of money to help you move forward. I mean, the flip side of that is even if there is no money, often there isn't. Just having that name associated is another validation. Again, I'm sure I'm stating the obvious, but having some affiliation, even if it's a letter of intent or a term sheet with some sort of partner can really change the dialogue with investors, because especially the cohort of investors are more from the tech side. If they really don't know what they don't know, so if you have some external third-party validation, that will go, in my experience, a really long way. So the next three topics: convertible debt, convertible equity, and safe instruments. I mean, everyone who's raised money, usually your first funding is going to come through a kind of convertible note instrument where you don't have to negotiate a price on the transaction. The documents are much more simple to implement, so the cost of implementation is lower, and the cost of implementation is lower. If you're raising a few $100,000, nobody can afford to pay us to do long protracted negotiations. And, you're going to want to pay a couple of $1,000s at most to your advisors to get the deal done. So this allows us. When I work with my startup clients, I'll give them a form of document, and hopefully investors are not trying to overly negotiate them and can get it implemented very quickly and easily. So there's the list on there, the key terms of what these things usually look like, and I like to keep them really simple. You can get much more complicated, but that to me doesn't help anyone. Convertible equity is more of a newfangled gadget, I would say, or contraption, and I don't know if people have heard of it, but basically it's the same thing as a convertible note, but Y Combinator actually came up with it. There's no maturity and no interest rate, so founders can be worried, oh, I get this loan, and if I hit the wall and run out of money, the investors are going to sweep in and take the asset. I think it's a little bit of a hollow concern because most investors aren't sophisticated enough to be able to pull that kind of maneuver off, but it is slightly more, it's perceived at least as being more founder friendly, and it gets rid of the issue of interest, which has tax and other issues, and it's becoming more widely adopted. And another variant, it's really the same thing as a SAFE that maybe people have heard of. Simple agreement for future equity. Again, it's not priced. It's really the same thing as a convertible note. It's just doesn't have the debt features associated with it. And the SAFE documents are online. You can Google it, and it makes it really. I think at some level it's agreed to out in the market, so you can get the documents and implement them. And I would say have a lawyer, have your startup counsel look at it. But in theory, you could maybe do it without counsel involved. Not something I'd recommend, but that's the intent of it. And again, I think at some level, all these instruments, the convertible debt, convertible equity, and safes, are something that allows you to get money quicker and cheaper and go do what you need to do on the business side. And one last point on the safes is, it's been widely adopted in tech. And I think healthcare, with a lot of these things I'm talking about today, is a little bit of a laggard. It eventually adopts the things that come out of the tech environment, but not as quickly. So the safe instruments, I haven't seen that many healthcare, really, especially medical device and biotech companies adopt it. It's starting to see it probably in the last 6 months. So incubators, mentioned them earlier when we were looking at the pyramid, but so what happens when you join an incubator is pretty interesting. What they've almost turned into funds, especially the top tier ones nowadays. They have raised a lot of capital. I mean, again, Y Combinator is the best in breed. They've early investors, or Airbnb and Dropbox came through their program, so they're the founders of that institution have made a lot of money. I'm not sure how involved they even are at this point. So they almost act like little funds. And so you go in, there's a price you need to pay. You'll have to give up some of your founder equity to them, and they'll buy that, different models, but often at nominal prices. And then they'll give you, maybe $15,000 to $100,000 to to start at the beginning of the program. And the real benefit of the incubators is that, as I mentioned, you're going to be branded as a graduate of that program, and they'll have a demo day at the end of the program where their network of investors will be there, and it's a really great way to meet. Again, depending on the quality of the incubator, the better the incubator, the better the investors that will be there at the end of the period on the demo day. And I know clients that have raised money this way, and I think on the healthcare side, I wouldn't have thought of it a few years ago, but it's definitely a trend that we're seeing. Any questions? Jack, nothing you want to hit me with? That's a great point. That typically is even later stage. I don't see the corporate VCs coming in with the first money, especially foreign corporate VCs. They're going to be pretty conservative. But to the extent, especially in medtech, the investors on St. Joe Road aren't around anymore. That the corporate VCs really have filled the void, and I'm negotiating a number of deals. Some of them you know about right now.
We're using SAFE on the medical system startup. We have customers signed up already and closing an angel round. My co-founder pushed this. I'd never seen it before. Are there any drawbacks to using a SAFE instrument?
Yeah, I think the one, again, it's perceived as more founder-friendly, but the one drawback that I see is you get the first 2 or 3 investors in that know it and have seen it before, and all the cool kids running around San Francisco or what have you. But the issue is you find some angel that's been buried under a rock somewhere, and I'm being a little facetious, but that have not heard of it, and there can actually be a pretty long education process. If they've seen something, they've been investing for 20 years and have never heard of this thing before, it's going to be a problem. And the golden rule is those with the gold make the rules. So there's the one reason I'm hesitant to encourage people to use the SAFE instruments, because it can complicate things, and the benefit is a little fleeting at some level.
There's no downside.
Well, the downside is if you get your investor 4 and 5 that don't understand it, they won't want to come in. It might make it harder to get other people that don't know what it is in subsequent closings of that.
So once we use SAFE on one investor, I can do them all.
Typically that's what people expect when, if the terms are different inherently, if you're going from a SAFE to a convertible note, the terms are going to be different because there's no interest rate, let's say, in the SAFE. That often as an investor, there is typically no what we call most favored nation status phrase in a really, or section in a really early stage financing like that. If there is, you would have a problem. There typically isn't, but even that, it's kind of an investor relations issue. I don't like giving different deals to different people because eventually people get unhappy with that.
But it doesn't affect the ARAP.
It shouldn't. No, but it wouldn't.
Yeah, could you address the slowing up of the VC funding? Sam at Y Combinator, we've gone back and forth, and even he's convinced that there's a void in that like $5 to $10 million range. So what do you give people for other options? Have you talked to, you don't even have investment banking out there, and I know Vern is working with one of our companies out of the QB3 and Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, using investment banking houses out of New York. And I think there's a time for start educating some of the startups on investment banking. They don't do it at the business schools, et cetera. So I just wanted your thoughts on that.
So, it's an interesting comment. I think it goes to my point that you have to be creative and talk to take every possible meeting you can. In my experience, early stage with investment bankers, they're not used to dealing with startups at all, especially the guys in New York.
Well, that's not true. This is where the educational problem is. There's the National Investment Bankers Association. We have over 200 investment bankers in our organization.
40 years, and there is a segment that they don't teach that do pre-revenue, medical, everything, that do that, 3 to 5 million, it's a minimum usually because it costs so much money to do a round because of the SEC and et cetera. And then you walk the person up the ladder. And the other thing is on the incubators, you're not talking about how much equity they give up. And sometimes we see companies out here that are giving up too much at the store, that they don't have anything left. I mean, I've seen round A for $5 million, they've lost control. See, that's the difference between investment banking process. We do not want to flip the company. We want to grow with them, and we want to loan them more and more money. So in a way, if you want to keep control of your company, that's probably the best way to go. It takes a little bit longer. And it's like crowdsourced funding. The people with the money in New York do not want to touch crowdsourced funding because they're not sure if you have a credible, accredited investors, and they're going to be the first ones sued. So that SAFE deal is kind of like this, an example of where some of the investors might be leery because they don't know what the legal ramifications are.
Yeah, so let's catch up after. I definitely want to know more about what you're doing. But on the last point on crowdsourcing, I'll get to that. I don't think we disagree on that point. So yeah, angel investing. I mean, obviously that's the cornerstone of the Valley, and it used to be earlier. I think even angels are going a little more later stage. Bane of Angels and Life Science Angels, they have a whole process, so it's not, it's more almost professional, and you're there's a whole spectrum of what those deals will look like. Then getting from just a structural basis, Series seed round financing is another relatively new phenomenon. I don't see it as much in healthcare as I see it in the IT space, but it's coming. It's basically what we used to call Series A preferred stock financings, but it's more simplified. There's kind of a treaty set of documents that is at that website there, seriesseed.com. It's meant to be a stripped down preferred stock equity financing where you can get money in without spending a lot of money on advisors and negotiating deal documents. Maybe it's $500,000 round or larger, not less. So it's not your small angel or seed or bridge loan deal, which would be sub $500,000. I mean, the one thing to be wary of is what we would call fake Series C arrangements, where it's really a full-blown VC set of documents. So that's kind of one practice point to be aware of, where someone might call it a Series C financing, but it's more full-blown negotiated deal. And so that's kind of a gating question that you want to get answered very quickly if you're talking to someone about a deal like this. So crowdfunding, been around for a while now. Pebble Watches many years ago, buy the product early. Doesn't necessarily, you're not buying a stent in a crowdsourced environment. But it is coming to healthcare. We're starting to see it more. It takes the right product. But jumping over selling equity in the company, the rules have come down from the SEC now, so you can actually raise up to $1 million in a period. But I think the disclosure burden of this, people call me not so irregularly, oh, we're going to go do a public offering now, there's new rules from the SEC, and it's like, you got to hold on, there's a lot of compliance associated with it.